Good morning, dear guests, excellencies, Danyar, National Bank Governor, dear colleagues, students. It gives me tremendous pleasure this morning to be able to welcome in our walls, our four walls, Ms. Christine Lagarde, the Managing Director, the 11th Managing Director, I should say maybe, of the International Monetary Fund. I don't think that Ms. Lagarde requires any introduction. She's so well known. Let me just simply note that I was in Boston at MIT in early March for a workshop. And on the walls when I was there, I saw two pictures, one of the US Secretary of Energy, Ernesto Moniz, and then a picture of Madame Lagarde, and both were supposed to speak later that week at MIT. And I was looking at those pictures and said, wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if we could invite both of them to speak at our place, at Nazarbayev University? And indeed, I think some of you remember, 6 weeks ago, we were able to welcome Secretary Moniz, and now today we are able to welcome Managing Director Lagarde. And it means that you guys, all our colleagues, are doing something right, that the karma must be right, so that, that the gods must be smiling on us. So with this, I'm not going to say anything further. I think Madame Lagarde will talk to us about, and I'm sure she will share with us her views, her assessment of the global economy, but also what are really the challenges for commodity-dependent economies such as Kazakhstan, but also in the broader region, including the Caspian Basin. So with this, if I may ask you, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, President. And the fact that you managed to invite within a matter of a couple of months those two speakers at MIT only speaks to your resilience and determination in actually implementing the plan and the strategy that you have. It also speaks very highly for the quality of this university and its appeal not only to speakers, but also to students and to excellent students, I'm sure. So thank you all for turning up today. It's a great pleasure to see many of you, faculty members, Governor of the Central Bank, all of you students who are present, and thank you for hosting my delegation. I did not come all by myself. We have at the first row, and I will not ask them to raise because we tend to be modest at the IMF, but clearly a member of the board of the IMF who represents Kazakhstan, Mr. Heller. And I will not name all of you guys, but they are all here. They are the head of the department, the mission chief for the country, and the division chief for this region. We have later on, as you all know, the Astana summit, which is taking place, and it will be preceded by a gathering of the finance ministers of the region, with whom we will have a discussion about the common challenges and the common response that can be offered in order to help the various economies in the region. And I'm really pleased that we're doing that. It's pretty much a first in the region, so we are looking forward to that. What I would like to do is, first of all, indeed, celebrate with you this 25th anniversary of independence back from 1991, and celebrate really the development, the strides, the resilience in actually delivering value for the country. That translates into a steady, roughly 7% growth of your economies in the last 15 years or so, a significant increase in GDP per capita, and certainly major developments that have taken place. I think Kazakhstan, in particular, has been one of those countries in the world that have actually taken advantage of the high commodity prices on which so many countries with natural resources strive for many years. But in this country, opportunities have been seized in order to actually put aside some of that national wealth in order to cater for times that would not necessarily be as best, and you have seized that opportunity. So, celebration for the past, but also looking at 2016 as a year of challenges, which can certainly be turned into opportunities, but that are really going to design a new growth model and a new general situation for the region and for Kazakhstan in particular. And this is indeed driven by the lower commodity prices that the world has experienced in the last 18 months or so, and which we believe it will continue to experience going forward, and which is leading many countries to actually revise their sources of growth. So we believe that 2016 is going to be a year of transformation for quite a few countries around the world, and certainly for Kazakhstan in particular. Now, I'm going to ask you to sort of close your eyes and imagine what it could be like if those challenges were turned into opportunities. You don't have to physically close your eyes, it's okay, but sort of intimately think about what it could be in a few years' time. So imagine a future where growth is no longer driven by oil, and this particular target is actually embraced by a few countries. And you know that in the Emirates, now in Saudi Arabia, the leaders are saying, we don't want to depend on oil anymore. And we celebrate the day when the last barrel will be extracted from the ground. Well, imagine that it could be so. Growth is no longer driven by oil and commodities, but by entrepreneurship, by you deciding to set up businesses, by technology, by trade, by medical research, by some of the skills that are being developed in that very university. A future with a thriving private sector, supported by efficient and transparent public institutions. A future where the region is increasingly connected to the rest of the world, not complaining that it has no access to the seas, but celebrating the fact that it is that unbelievable bridge, gate, pass-through for those trade flows that will certainly continue to irrigate the world. Far-fetched dream? Maybe not. It is certainly a future that you can actually foresee and that you can work for. And this vision, it seems to me, is very much aligned with some of the strategies that have been identified by President Nazarbayev, aspiration for the country's future, and forgive my pronunciation, the Kazakhstan 2050 nearly Zol. Is that okay? All right. And the 100 concrete steps, that's a bit easier for me. But articulating your visions, closing your eyes and dreaming is nice, but it doesn't deliver. So a vision has to be actually delivered upon, and action is needed to that effect. And that's where you come in. And you come in armed with the knowledge, with the education, with the energy that Kazakhstan can actually build upon in order to deliver that new inclusive growth model of the future. And it's certainly something that you can do. You know, it is my first visit to Kazakhstan, and it is my first visit of Astana. I went through last night with all the lights on at midnight, and I went through this morning with this beautiful sun that you enjoy at this time of the year. And to see how this capital, which really started from very little, has grown into that really impressive city with clearly the vision to demonstrate that architecture can actually deliver a site where people can actually live, can actually work, and can be proud of. Now, you clearly demonstrated that big way, and if you decided to actually do that further and try to deliver that new growth model, I'm certain that it can be done. So, we at the IMF don't pretend that we have the recipe, we don't pretend that we know it all, but we have based our involvement and our partnership with countries on 70 years of crisis experience, of policy development, of technical assistance to countries. And what I would like to take you through is, first of all, what are the developments at the moment and how those global challenges and opportunities actually matter for the region and for Kazakhstan. Then I would like to sort of take you through this motion of a virtuous circle of policies to support that transformation of the region and of your country. And then third, maybe more intimately, what does that mean for you? And how can you participate in that process? So let's start with the big picture and how it affects the region and the global, and how the global economy affects both the region and the country. Over the past 2 decades, Central Asia and Caucasus region has become more integrated with the world. International trade flows are now around $230 billion, up from just $30 billion in 1996. Foreign direct investment grew from just about $20 million to now $20 billion. These flows have played a major role in driving growth and raising living standards. Greater openness, of course, means greater sensitivity to external shocks, and there are several developments that are of concern to policymakers around the world, and this region is no exception. I'll take 3 of them. One is slower growth in the world, but in Europe in particular, which is a partner for this region. Second, which is one that I've touched on very briefly, is this sustained lower prices for commodities and for oil in particular. And third, in a way, a success story, but which has downside for others, which is the transformation of the Chinese growth model. Lower growth levels, more qualitative growth, probably less movements and less trade with the rest of the world, as China is focusing more so on its domestic market and less on exports. So those are the 3 buckets of risks and downside elements that can actually impact the region and Kazakhstan in particular. And these developments have contributed to rising financial market volatility and a sharp deceleration in capital and trade flows, and a reverse of capital flows for that matter. At the same time, we have seen trade growth weaken around the world. During 2012-2015, most countries have been importing less relative to their incomes than in the years leading up to the financial crisis in 2008. Now, clearly, these trends have held back the global economy. Our most recent forecast has global growth largely unchanged in 2016 relative to 2015, roughly 3.2%. 2017, we forecast a 3.5%, which in and of itself is not such a great increase in growth. So soft growth, relatively fragile, and significant downside on the horizon. That picture is similar in Central Asia. Growth in the region has slowed to a 2-decade low of just 1% this year, and is expected to pick up to only 3.7% over the medium term, well below the 8.3% average recorded in previous decades. Lower commodity prices, weaker growth in key trading partners, especially China and Russia, are profoundly impacting the region. And we believe that these changes are not just conjunctural, short-term changes, but they are here for the longer term. So what does it mean for Kazakhstan and countries in Central Asia? In many ways, this change is a wake-up call. Like other countries in the region, Kazakhstan faces a set of important policy challenges. How to nurture new drivers of growth while strengthening institutions and policy frameworks. How to diversify away from oil and commodities into new products and services while making growth more inclusive, and how to capitalize on the strategic location at the heart of Asia, reviving its role as a vital hub for the exchange of goods and culture for the new Silk Road. To do all this, both Kazakhstan and your neighbors need to embark on the next generation of reforms, and that's what I would like to touch upon. Some of these reforms are already set in train. Countries in the region have taken important steps to deal with the impact of external shocks. Many have allowed the value of their currencies to actually fluctuate and adjust. Kazakhstan has opted to float the tenge And this was a painful but necessary step to respond to growing financial pressures. I know that it means that a lot of the goods you import are more expensive, but it also put pressure on inflation and on those who borrowed in dollars. Yet it also means that foreign currency reserves are not being used to defend an exchange rate that is out of line with the new realities. And it means new opportunities for exporters because they are more competitive and there could be more jobs in sectors that compete with imports. So it's by virtue of this realignment of currency in line with the fundamentals of the economy, you actually shift the economy into being more effective, more competitive, more productive on your domestic strength. And that doesn't only apply to the big players, to those that export grain, machinery, but also to the smaller companies and entrepreneurs who will benefit from new opportunities in light industrial goods, in biotech, in green products, in all sorts of services. Now, these businesses, particularly the small entrepreneurs that eventually grow to becoming medium and bigger, as maybe you aspire to be, they need a conducive environment as well that is business-friendly, that is predictable. And in that area, I would like to mention 4 key actions that are needed in order to facilitate this flourishing of entrepreneurship. First, floating the currency is just the beginning to a modernization of macroeconomic policies. And given the hurtful side effects that I mentioned before, it is important that monetary and fiscal policy frameworks are upgraded to work efficiently in a world of greater exchange rate flexibility. This includes, for instance, and Mr. Governor, I hope you agree with me, a clear mandate for the central bank to pursue price stability, strengthening the tools, instruments, and practices to support this mandate in great independence, deeper and more developed financial markets that can also improve financial intermediation and foster an inclusive financial system. At the same time, a consolidated and transparent fiscal framework is also essential, covering not only the state budget, but also local governments, state-owned companies, non-budgetary funds, because the fiscal framework is one and not scattered all over the place with parts that are left to a bit of obscurity while the center is made transparent. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of advertising here, because you may have received this document, some of you. It's called Exchange Rate Developments and Policies in the Caucasus and Central Asia. And that's a piece of research that has been conducted by our researchers, by our economists, which will tell you a lot more about this, the benefit of exchange rate ability to actually adjust to transformation of the economy. So that was one, stronger macroeconomic framework, both in monetary and in fiscal. The second area is more effective and transparent institutions. And in that regard, clearly what is needed is to address maybe the unfair, but the perception, uncomfortable as it is, about the region, that economic opportunities are not open to the same degree for everyone, and that institutions suffer from either corruption or lack of transparency. Now, people will debate forever as to whether it is reality or perception, but most people will also tell you that it is perception that matters. And therefore, if those perceptions are out there, they need to be addressed. And one way to address them is by having transparent institutions and a system that is actually accountable to the people. Let me give you one example. The World Economic Forum 2015-2016 Global Competitiveness Report notes that countries in the region, including Kazakhstan, have made some progress in improving competitiveness. Yet, it also states that limited access to financing and corruption are still reported as the most binding impediments to doing business in Kazakhstan. There are other reports that come with similar conclusions. And this means that there is a premium on ensuring that there are fair and transparent laws and rules with proper fiscal and business accounting, and that they are implemented through impartial regulators and backed up by an independent judiciary. It's a lot to swallow, and it's a lot to transform and to improve. And I'm not suggesting that it is not there, but because of that perception, which might be grounded in reality, it needs to be addressed. Third area, so strong macroeconomic framework, effective and transparent institutions with the whole system. Third area is a more open and integrated economy. Economies in the regions are linked to each other, but they could benefit from more opening up. Intra-regional trade in Central Asia stands at less than 6% of total trade, the lowest share in Asia. And at the same time, Kazakhstan is a very large country with a relatively small domestic market and high cost of doing business. So some would say that Central Asia faces a predicament because it is landlocked. I would say it is blessed with systemic and dynamic neighbors on all sides. China, Russia, Europe, India, Southeast Asia, they're all at your doorsteps because the country is so large. So if the region is to become the main artery of the One Road, One Belt initiative, it needs to deepen integration both internally and globally. Kazakhstan's recent accession to WTO is an important step in that direction. Now, by some estimates, accession to WTO would translate into gains of about 3.7% of GDP in the medium term and close to 10% in the longer term. Even so, actions will need to go further in the region if the region is to become a hub for new goods and services along the way. And that means modern, efficient, low-cost transportation, logistics services. It also means an environment where new investment can thrive and that is open to everyone, entrepreneurs, foreign investors, and women. Speaking of which, and this is my fourth area, inclusiveness. And I mean inclusiveness at large, but I'm going to focus on the inclusiveness vis-à-vis women. There are many of you in this room, which is great. And congratulations, President, for having such a great gender almost parity in all respects, and particularly a great participation of women in sciences and technology and engineering. This is terrific and quite an achievement. But Kazakhstan ranks 47 out of 145 in the World Economic Forum Gender Gap Index and ranks even higher on economic participation and opportunity. This is good. This is commendable. But most women are less active in the formal sector, and opportunities for them lie mainly in the informal sector, where incomes are lower. So Kazakhstan can actually do better to encourage women's participation in the formal sector, not the informal sector. We would recommend, as is done by other countries, stronger policy frameworks, more transparent institutions, greater openness, more inclusive policies, in order to set that virtuous circle of policies to achieve a growth that is actually sustained, that is diversified, and that is inclusive as well. So please keep doing what you're doing, President, and make sure that the very bright women of Kazakhstan are actually included in the formal sector of this economy and are encouraged to start their business, to join companies at their level of excellence. Your country is the second largest economy in Central Asia, and the second most populous as well. It is also one of the youngest, with close to 7 million people below the age of 25. So there is a lot that you can do. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm thinking about education, of course, thinking about technology, thinking about connecting with the world, and that's what I would like to conclude with. Education. Abe Kwon Yuli. Does that ring a bell? Okay, good. Again, I know you know, but my pronunciation is awful. But I know he's the father of modern Kazakh literature. He once said, So pronounce it for me. Thank you. A lot better. He said, a strong man may defeat 100 enemies, but a learned man, 1,000. Now, the good thing is that there are no enemies in sight. We don't want to start a battle. But there will be new challenges that must be conquered. Creativity and innovation will increasingly determine success for your generation. Striving for excellence in math, in sciences, in technology will equip you with the range of skills necessary to create innovative products and services. And that could involve anything: software applications, biomedical innovations, satellite tracking devices to ensure the efficiency of cargo transportation from across Kazakhstan and coming from China, going to Germany and beyond. I'm talking about things that I'm sure you master a lot better than I do. Suffice to say that in-depth education in those fields is absolutely critical. Technology and green industries. Digitization makes for more openness and transparency. I'm sure that you embrace it. I know that you have 3D printing capacity in this university, and I was also told by your president that your building will eventually become green and will reduce its footprint in the next few years. And that is a challenge that is thrown at us, at you. And I'm confident that you will deliver, Kazakhstan will deliver. During my visit, I was actually very impressed to learn that your national carrier, Air Astana, in precisely the area of technology and logistics, is actually a world-class carrier. And that was delivered in a very short period of time. My third recommendation. Okay, first one, education, education. Second one, really focus on science and technologies without forgetting about the humanities indeed. But my third one is going to be about connecting with the world. I'll tell you one thing. When I was chairman of Baker McKenzie, we decided to open an office in Almaty. And that was back in the mid-90s. And I'll never forget that associate meeting, because we brought together all the young lawyers from all over the world in those associate meetings so that they could link up together. And for the first time, we had a couple of associates coming from Almaty. Well, in those days, they were mostly embarrassed because they didn't have a credit card. And they had no idea how they were going to pay their hotel bill. Now, the firm eventually, because it was a large international law firm, managed to organize that for them. 3 years later, we had another associate meeting at which they turned up. Totally adjusted, totally connected, spoke English beautifully, had their understanding of American-style way of conducting business, didn't have any issue with their credit card, of course, by then. And it only goes to show that connecting with the world is a process. And there is no borders, no hurdles that one cannot go through, face, and overcome. And it was most impressive to see how fast they had gone through that learning process. And this was simply not only because they were well educated, and they were, but because they were engaged and they were involved in reaching out, in connecting, in understanding how others were operating. And so were we to understand how business was conducted in Almaty. I have to say, in those days, it was a bit wild. But that would be my recommendation. Reach out, engage, speak other languages. You don't have to speak French, that's okay. Although if you try, it's fine too. But it's so important that you actually enrich the world by actually contributing what you know, what your culture is, what your national attributes are, what your cuisine is about. And that's how we make the world. We need more. The IMF is a fascinating institution with over 150 nationalities. They all connect, they all enrich each other. They learn from each other, and they apply their culture to this very international approach that we try to have with our members. It's an institution where you continue to learn throughout your professional career. One that is focused on 3 business lines, essentially. One that is probably the most well-known, but not necessarily the one that grows all the time. It goes through cycles like that. That's the lending activity that we have with countries, where we put together programs in the form of partnership. And of course, it is up when the world is down, because we are totally counter-cyclical in that respect. When the world is fine, we don't have much activity. But when the world is facing difficult seas and winds, then we are very active. The second line of business is our policy advice, which we give on a bilateral basis to all countries, without differentiating whether you're a small country, you're a medium country, you're a very big country, or whether you are developing, emerging, or developed, with the same, what we call tough love. In other words, we say it as we see it. And we do that both on bilateral and multilateral basis, trying to constantly improve upon the quality of the research and the policy advice that we give, and enlarging, actually, the field, because there are many more areas that we regard as macro-critical, such as inequality, such as climate change and the necessary fiscal policies that have to be applied as a result, such as gender contribution to the economy, such as corruption as a hurdle to development. And the third area, which is actually the fastest growing area of activity in the IMF, is the technical assistance and capacity building that we offer to the membership in order to help them improve their monetary policy, improve their debt management, improve their public finance management, and which we provide in spade, not only to the developing countries in particular regions, but in pretty much all countries around the world that are members of the IMF, and we have 189 of them at the moment. So please don't hesitate if you are interested in economics, if you want to pursue an aspiration that is closely associated not with making a lot of money, but with really participating in a great mission, which has to do with improving the stability of the world and helping out other countries and other people around the world. Don't hesitate. Come and knock at the door. It's open. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your inspiring speech. Now, let me invite, we don't have much time, but let me invite some of our students and younger staff to ask. We have time for 2-3 questions, so please be concise. In the middle, yes. And introduce yourself, please.
Bonjour, Madame Lagarde.
Bonjour.
Bienvenue au Kazakhstan. Merci pour venir à l'université Nazarbayev. Je m'appelle Ayman Temirova. Je travaille à l'université Nazarbayev. J'ai une question pour vous aujourd'hui. Did I speak in English? Okay.
Merci pour le français, c'était un plaisir.
Oui. En fait, j'ai habité en France pendant 2 ans. C'est pour ça que je parle français. I have one question to you. Could you please give an advice to young Kazakhstani women who would like to pursue a career as remarkable and extraordinary as yours? Thank you.
Career as what? I didn't get the... Get closer to the mic. Pursue a career in what?
Pursue a career as remarkable and extraordinary as yours. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I'm sorry to say, it doesn't come from pure inspiration or genius. It comes with really hard work and determination, resilience, and focus. I never had a career plan, and I never strategized the next step. But I've always worked hard, and I've always been prepared to take risks. So in my days, back in the late 70s, early 80s, it was risky to be a young associate in a law firm and to have a baby. I decided to go ahead because I wanted to have a family. It was risky at one point in time to say, okay, I'll move to the US and I'll work in Chicago. It was risky to, at the height of my career in that firm when I was chairman, to actually say yes when the president of France drafted me to become trade minister. I gave up a lot of comfort and a lot of retirement benefits and all the rest of it, but I thought it was just worth it. And I said yes. It was a bit strange to actually leave my country again and return to Washington. So I think it's a combination of hard work, willingness to take risks, and I would say that I could not have done it if I had not had family support around me. And the family support can come from all sorts of different people. It can be a husband, it can be parents, it can be your children at some stage in your life who are supporting you and encouraging you. And I think that all of that for me was rooted in two things which have fueled me, and that is a combination of energy and confidence. It doesn't come from the sky. It's something that you can work on, that you can build. For me, having been an athlete for a period of my life has helped with the energy level, with the ability to, recover in a short period of time, to display energy when it's needed. The confidence is something that comes with love from other people. I know no other recipe. So whatever you give, you will receive, is my bottom line on that confidence aspect.
Merci, madame.
Thank you. Anybody else? We have just time. Okay, on the right side. This young gentleman.
Good morning, everybody in the audience. My name is Bilal Hasenov. I study at the Kazakh-German University in Almaty, and I have two interesting questions. The first is not so complicated.
You decide it's interesting, yeah?
Yes. This was also very interesting, but how do you like it here, people, weather maybe, in Kazakhstan? And the second one is more connected with economy of Kazakhstan, and I would like to ask you, we in Kazakhstan have not such the developed economy basis, I would call it, but our strategy in Kazakhstan nowadays is the innovational and industrial development. So my question is it really possible to make really competitive innovations nowadays without having really developed industrial basis? Is it really possible, or do we have to have some new ideas how we can get the way out of this problem? And that's the question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I agree with you. Interesting. And on the first one, I can't really comment because, this is my first visit. I've not seen the country in the winter. I lived in Chicago for 5 years. And Chicago is a pretty cold city as well. I loved it in Chicago, whether it was cold and windy or warm and sunny. So I'm sure that I would really like your climate as well. I don't know how long your winters are. I feel that they're quite long. Huh? On the innovation, I think it's a very good question. I'm not the ultimate expert on that, but what we have seen in many other countries that have focused on innovation is that there are segments where you can actually, in a way, jumpstart that stage of industrial developments and yet reach that innovation stage that you're referring to. And I believe that in high tech, in what is generally called ITC, it's probably more conducive to that. If you look at the sort of more traditional industrial sectors, whether you think about chemicals, about pharmaceuticals, and a few others, in the traditional sense, most people specializing in research and development will tell you that you can actually reach that innovation stage, provided that you have gone through enough and that you have enough of a critical mass of industry activities itself. So I think that the trick is actually in terms of focusing on innovation is to identify from a strategic point of view which segments, which areas are going to be most conducive to innovation without having to go through an expanded period of development of the industry itself. And I would suggest that whether it's biotech, whether it's ITC, some areas of pharmaceuticals is probably, those are probably areas where it can be done. If you look, for instance, at ITC, it's quite amazing to see how, say, a country like Kenya, for instance, which certainly hasn't gone through the industrial development phase, has managed to jumpstart that. Forget about the fixed line telephone communications, for instance. Yet the mobile industry is transforming the country, both from a farming point of view, but more importantly from a financing point of view, where you have banking that is really prevalent in the country to a much larger extent because they have based their development on the extensive use of mobile telecommunication devices. So it's innovation, but it's the smart way of innovating in order to actually avoid the traps of some of those necessary heavy-duty industrial developments that will be conducive to innovation, but which will take too much time.
Thank you very much. I would have liked to take one more question, but unfortunately time is pressing. And I see a very nervous central bank governor who is already signaling that we have to come to closure. So let me take this opportunity to thank you, Madame Lagarde, for spending time with us. I think we all have been inspired. And I know that you're busy over the next 5 years, but from your words, I sort of get a feeling that, ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you the future, who knows, president of Nazarbayev University, maybe. So thank you very much.